call this meeting to order. In terms of land recognition, I want to recognize that we live on Chochenyo, Muwekma, and Ohlone land. And our ceremonial quote is, "You can use an eraser on the drafting table or a sledgehammer on the construction site," by Frank Lloyd Wright. And now we'll go ahead and do roll call. And actually, I'm so sorry. I may need to restart for purposes of Luis. Luis, do you want me to count you down and restart? Luis Zamora? Can anyone from staff contact Luis? I'm happy to restart if needed in order to live stream.
I think, Antonio, all you have to do is give him a countdown.
Okay.
Start it.
Okay, sounds good. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, thanks everybody. We're just gonna restart this because I don't believe I've counted us in for live streaming. I'm gonna call the meeting to order. In terms of recognizing, we sit on Chochenyo, Muwekma, and Ohlone land. Our ceremonial quote is, "You can use an eraser on the drafting table or a sledgehammer on the construction site," by Frank Lloyd Wright. And I'll do a roll call. If you could identify yourself as a committee member, a member of staff, or a presenter, or a member of the board. I believe those are all the categories, but let me know otherwise. I'm going to read people's names in the order that they show up on my screen. Trustee Jones.
Here, I'm a trustee.
Thanks. Cecily Lee.
Cecily Lee, I'm a committee member.
Thanks. Joel Pullen.
Joel Pullen, presenter.
Thank you. Brian Kilgore.
Here, member staff.
Thank you. Brian Gephardt.
Here, committee member, parent.
Thank you. William or Bill Rojek.
William Rojek, committee member, here.
Cool, thank you. Judy Nye.
Here, I'm a FSMA representative.
And committee member, thank you. Waylon Lee.
Here, presenter from the city of Fremont.
Thank you. Michelle Hartman Brewer.
Yes, here, representative of SEIU, committee member.
Thank you. Liz Fisher.
Here, committee member.
Thank you. Sharon Coco.
Here, committee member.
Thank you. Malia Santos.
Here from Circ Board E and also a committee member.
Awesome, thank you. Kelly Lynch McMahon.
FUSD staff.
Thank you. And Henry Fung.
Committee member, teacher.
Got it. And Kevin Arthur.
Here, FUSD staff member.
Awesome, thank you very much. And okay, got it. And then just as a reminder, let's not use chat for the committee due to Brown Act concerns. If anything, use it only for process, no substance. Now we can move to adopting the agenda. And I'd like to entertain a motion.
I move to adopt the agenda.
Okay, I have a motion. Cecily?
I don't know if this is where I second it or ask for a time extension on one of the items.
Right, so you would be making an amendment
Okay.
To the agenda. So here would be the place.
Okay, so I would like to amend the agenda and I would like to add time to item number 7, air quality, COVID and fire season. I'd like to, do I just say the time now or, I'm sorry. I'd like to add 10 minutes to the discussion there.
Okay, got it. So I'll take that you seconded and amended. And then do we have a second to the motion to extend air quality for 10 minutes for a total of 25 minutes?
This is Henry. I accept the I second that amendment.
Got it. Thanks. All right. So and this is mostly to test out that everybody still remembers how to vote. I'm going to put it up for a vote. So if you could raise either your virtual, not your virtual or physical hand. In order to raise your physical hand, you'd have to turn on video. Alternatively, you can go to the bottom of your screen in participants, and I believe use the raise hand feature. Cecily, is that a question? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All right, so all in favor of adding 10 minutes to that item of the agenda, please raise your virtual or physical hand. Got it. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, the ayes have it, and so we'll extend. One point I did want to note, that the demographer had to attend to an emergency, and so is not going to be able to join us today. All right, so that's the amendment. Without objection, I'll take adoption of the agenda. Is there any objection to adopting the agenda as amended? And let me check the participants tab. Seeing none, the agenda is adopted as amended. And just as a reminder, what we did is voted on the amendment, and then we had voted without objection on the agenda. So we'll move forward to approval of the minutes. We'll do this without objection since we've tested people's ability to vote. Unless anybody has any comments.
Just want to add that Mary has joined us. Mary Vigil.
Thank you. Mary, can you state your name and your role? I believe you would state either as a representative of an organization and that you're a committee member.
Yes, I'm so sorry. My name is Mary Vigil and I'm representing the CSEA.
Great. And the only reason I asked for that is to make sure that you're able to participate fully in the meeting.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. Are there any comments to the minutes? Seeing none, I will, without objections, accept the minutes as proposed to the committee. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and adopt the minutes as presented to you in Exhibit A. Now we'll move over to oral and written communications. We've received only a private message to me after there was a question about the COVID vaccine information on Q&A session resources, but it was not a public comment. So we can go ahead and move forward. And now we will hand it over to the city. As requested by the committee, the city, we had asked for the city to present on development plans and their ensuing school impacts. And so I'll hand it over to the city and put a timer for 15 minutes. Thanks.
Hi there, good evening. My name is Joel Pullen. I'm the planning manager for the city of Fremont. Just a little about me. I grew up in Fremont and live in Irvington right now. Have some kids, 2 kids, one at Irvington, one at Horner. So this, what you do is very important to me as a community member, and I appreciate it. Also tonight here with the city is Waylon Lee. He's the long-range principal planner for the city of Fremont. And he's primarily tasked with doing things like the housing element and general plan and zoning updates, kind of looking ahead at our city and our growth. And that's why he's a key member of this discussion tonight. First of all, wanted to thank Kelly for the invite. And I wanted to say, if for nothing else, I'm glad I came here so I could steal your Frank Lloyd Wright quote. It's a great quote, illustrating how hard it is to do things afterwards compared to doing them right the first time. So I appreciate that. We're here tonight on Kelly's introduction for a brief introduction of some big picture economic and housing growth data at the regional and at the local level. And before we get started, if you can bring up the presentation, Waylon, a couple caveats. One, we're not demographers. You have very good demographers that go through and look at all the data and, we're not that. We're here to explain some state and regional and local, really legislative requirements is what they amount to, that local jurisdictions like Fremont and other cities have to comply with. Second caveat, growth projection is complicated. I think you've seen in your district and other districts, some of the projections.
Joel, just 1 second. Waylon, can you try again? I've now allowed all participants to share screen, so maybe that was the issue.
Deal. There we go. I see it on mine. Thank you. So secondly, growth projection is complicated. I think we've all seen various school districts around the state grappling with changing projections, notably a reduction in expected students. And that's due to a lot of, regional and state and other forces. One of those, of course, we're in a pandemic, and there's realization that there's uncertainty both now and coming out the other end of, economic related factors from the pandemic. There's also some reported out migration from California, from more urban cores to suburban cities, et cetera. And so those are all uncertainties that, government at all levels has to get our minds around. So tonight we're going to talk about three major topics. The primary two, and the third kind of our reaction to it, is woven throughout. One is Plan Bay Area, which is really a regional plan for a sustainable Bay Area, a connected one, a diverse one that's doing right by the environment, but also economically growing and growing to support housing at all affordability levels throughout the Bay Area. Second one is the Regional Housing Needs Determination, or you might also see it A on the end of that acronym, Allocation, which is a state mandated plan for housing. And we'll talk more about that. At the local level, our response to that regional housing need allocation is something called the housing element, which we're in the midst of right now. It's a 2-year process that'll end at the end of 2022 to plan for compliance with that state requirement. And so to get into those details more, Waylon's here, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to him.
Thanks, Joel. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Waylon Lee, Principal Planner for Long Range Planning with the City of Fremont. As Joel just mentioned, the purpose of this presentation is to provide the committee with a very high-level overview of 2 important regional planning initiatives. The 2023 through 2031 Regional Housing Needs Allocation for the San Francisco Bay Area, and tied into that, the City of Fremont's Local Housing Element Update, and Plan Bay Area 2050. First part of the presentation is regarding the Regional Housing Needs Allocation process, which you'll commonly hear referred to as the RHNA process. So first, what is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation? In short, for the past 50 years or so, the state of California has required by law that all local governments adequately plan to meet the housing needs of everyone in our communities. To meet this requirement, each city must develop a housing element under its general plan that shows how it will meet both current and projected housing needs. Every 8 years, the state quantifies what the housing needs of a region in the state is over the next 8-year period. And then it establishes the number of housing units that the region needs to produce in order to meet its housing needs. This is referred to as the Regional Housing Needs Determination. Each region in the state is then charged with determining how to fairly distribute that need to each of the cities and counties in the region. Locally, for the 9 counties in the Bay Area, the Regional Planning Agency is the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG. And that's the entity that's responsible for developing the methodology that allocates housing needs fairly across the region. By statute, the methodology needs to consider a variety of factors, such as fair housing and equity, sustainability. It needs to link jobs and transit to housing. And it's supposed to ensure that all jurisdictions take on their fair share of responsibility for the region's housing needs. Once each local government has received their assignment, then they're required to update their housing elements to demonstrate that they have adequate capacity to support their fair share of housing, and also that there are policies and programs in place to support the production of that housing. I want to apply some emphasis to this next point because I think it's a commonly misunderstood point. It's that the regional housing needs determination isn't a forecast for new housing development. Instead, it describes how much housing is needed to accommodate future growth and future housing needs. And it also captures how much new housing is needed to accommodate existing unmet need. And by existing unmet need, I mean, it accounts for the years of underproduction of housing in the region, which I think in turn has led to some of the region's issues in terms of housing affordability, overcrowding, displacement, and sprawl. So in other words, it's an expression of how many housing units the region needs, but not necessarily a forecast of how many new housing units are going to be built, if that makes sense. As I mentioned earlier, the RENA process happens every 8 years. And as part of that process, cities need to update their housing elements to provide evidence that is sufficient land for housing development to allow for those RENA targets to be met. All the cities in the Bay Area are currently in the same boat in that we're in the 2015 to 2023 RENA cycle. At the very start of the cycle, back in 2014, the city of Fremont adopted its 2015 to 2023 housing element. And as part of that exercise, we had to demonstrate that there were adequate sites in the city to reasonably accommodate the 5,455 new units, which represented our fair share of the region's housing needs across various income levels. This year, the city is going to start working on an update to its housing element for the next 8-year period, and that's going to cover the years 2023 to 2031. And that housing element update will need to be adopted by January 2023. I think you'll quickly notice that the preliminary estimates for the city's RENA for the upcoming cycle is quite a bit higher than the current period, which is as a total number, 12,897 units, which is quite a bit higher than the current number. And that's largely because of recent changes to state law, which I think I touched on a little bit earlier, requires that cities plan for meeting unmet housing needs in addition to future housing needs. So again, that doesn't mean that ABAG is forecasting that we're going to produce 12,897 new housing units over 8 years, which if you do some math is roughly 1,600 new housing units per year. It means that we need to, as part of our housing element update, provide evidence that we have sufficient land in the city and sufficient sites that can accommodate that level of growth. And if there aren't, we would have to figure out how to increase capacity to meet that need.
Hey, real quick, Wayland, Joel here. So Chair Antonio, it appears based on the slides we've gone through and the remaining left, we might need to go a little over 15 minutes just as a time check. Is that okay? There's some complex material to cover.
Yeah, can you let us know how much time you think for purposes of just getting through the presentation you would need? And I'll take full responsibility for not allocating sufficient time.
No worries. Wayland, thoughts?
I'll I'll talk fast. 5 more minutes.
No, I don't want you to speak fast because this was a specific request of the committee. So again, I'll take responsibility and then I'll put it to the committee what their desires are. But to fully, go through this presentation, what time would you request just for purposes of getting through the presentation? And then also I'll, ask the committee if they want to do 5 or 10 minutes of Q&A.
Maybe 10.
Okay, so committee members, I'll entertain a motion for 15 minutes of additional time. We have currently 4 minutes left in this agenda item.
I'll
Mary?
make the motion.
I wanted to move 20 minutes, 10 minutes for presentation, 10 minutes for Q&A.
All right, I had a motion on the floor. I'll take yours as a second, Brian, an amendment. But you know what, forget that. I'll just make it 20. If the person who made the motion is fine with that.
I'm fine with that, yes.
Okay, great. All right, so we have a motion for 20 minutes. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. Could I ask everybody to use their virtual hands because I can't quite, no, wait, I think I can. No, it'll be hard. Could I ask everybody to, all in favor of adding 20 minutes, please raise your virtual hand. Please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, thank you. I'll add 20 minutes.
Thank you. We promise to make it worth your while.
I won't talk fast, but I'll try to be efficient. So for perspective, you look back in time, if you look at housing production from last year, 2020, we issued building permits for 311 new housing units last year. If we look at housing production over a longer period of time, housing production in 2020 was more or less in line with previous years, minus a spike in building permits in 2017, 2018, and 2019, which generally associated with strong market conditions, but also the 4,000 new units that were approved around the Warm Springs BART station and that are largely now under construction. So if we were to, we would basically be permitting new housing at our peak years of production every year for 8 years if we were to actually build housing at the rate of our RHNA target. And obviously a lot of factors are involved that influence whether housing gets built. But in this case, the city's obligation and responsibility is to ensure that the regulatory framework is in place to allow housing to be built at those levels through the housing element. Let's quickly point out that while housing production in Fremont has kept pace with our RHNA overall during the current RHNA cycle, its affordable housing production has fallen short of our targets. So while the majority of the city's housing need is in the affordable housing categories, production has been primarily market rate housing. And our peer cities are generally in the same situation, which I included just to highlight how inherently difficult it is under current conditions to build affordable housing and meet our hefty lower income housing production goals.
Let me jump in here, Waylon, and just briefly mention, if you've seen our council meetings, from those discussions that the reason above moderate is much higher is, the way that affordable housing works is it's largely paid for by inclusionary fees on that market rate development. Most of those are taken by the city and doled out for attractive affordable housing developments to take advantage to leverage with other funds. So that's how that works. Really.
Thanks, Joel. So this map shows where housing, or at least the major housing projects, were permitted in the city last year. You can see that just taking a quick look, that development of new housing was mostly concentrated around the Warm Springs South Fremont BART station. And that's consistent with the city's general plan, which calls for the city to focus its future growth strategically in its priority development areas, which is around its current and planned BART stations and the Centerville train station, and the city's primary transit spine, which runs north and south through the city along Fremont Boulevard and Osgood Road and Warm Springs Boulevard. Just to wrap up about RENA, looking forward over the next couple of years as we update our housing element, we'll be seeking public input on how we're going to address the city's housing needs, and hopefully you'll be there participating in the conversation. We'll be starting public engagement efforts in the near future, so hopefully you all will stay involved with that. So moving on to Plan Barrier 2050, I won't spend nearly as much time on this topic, but in a nutshell, it's the long-range planning and transportation plan for the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's currently under development. It's a joint initiative between ABAG and MTC, which is the regional transportation agency. And it's required to be prepared every 4 years. And the plan serves as both the regional transportation plan, and it also serves as the region's sustainable community strategy, which means it links land use planning and transportation planning for the purpose of meeting the region's greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. So essentially that means connecting housing, jobs, and transit in a way where people are driving fewer miles and producing less greenhouse gas emissions. So the plan provides strategies that essentially provide, they call it a blueprint for how the region can meet both its long-term housing needs as well as its greenhouse gas reduction targets. It basically answers the question of what do we need to do as a region in order to meet both of those goals. So while Plan Barrier doesn't have any local land use authority, it does influence public policy, and it does steer public investments towards growth geographies that allow for more sustainable growth. So that's how the plan would influence future growth. So Plan Barrier 2050 plans to accommodate 1.4 million new households as well as 1.4 million new jobs between the baseline year of 2015 and 2050. In this graphic, Fremont is lumped together with the cities of Newark and Union City in what it's called the Southern Alameda County Super District for graphical purposes, which Plan Barrier 2050 depicts as accommodating 3% of the region's overall housing growth and 6% of its overall job growth. Based on our own internal calculations, we believe Plan Barrier 2050 shows Fremont growing from roughly 75,000 households to maybe a little under 100,000 households by 2015, according to Plan Barrier. And a little bit like RENA, the growth patterns in Plan Barrier aren't necessarily a prediction of where growth is going to occur. It describes a particular scenario in which the region can meet its housing needs as well as greenhouse gas reduction targets. And in that way, it's more of a policy exercise that serves to influence growth to occur in strategic places to meet our goals. I'll wrap up with Plan Barrier by saying that Plan Barrier doesn't have a crystal ball 30 years into the future. Even ABAG in its efforts to develop Plan Barrier had what they called the Horizons Initiative, which explored how to plan for an uncertain future. Even if you look at the growth shown in the previous version of Plan Barrier from 4 years ago, I mentioned before that its plan is updated every 4 years. It's quite a bit different from the current forecast, where the last version forecasted that the region would have 3.4 million households by 2040. Plan Barrier forecasts 3.7 million households in 2014. So it's an exact science, but since it's updated every 4 years and it's multiple years in the making, it's like Plan Barrier never really quite starts or ends. It's kind of continually in the process of being updated to take into account new information, and it continues to take a fresh look forward. So that's Plan Barrier. I just have one more slide, which I want to mention to the committee in terms of looking at more near-term housing growth. I thought I would just mention a good resource of the city's development activity map and table, which is something we update a few times a year. and it's posted on our website. And it shows development projects that are in the pipeline, as in under review, approved, under construction. Now, not everything in the development activity map is going to be built, but it does provide an idea of where new housing may be built over the next several years, at least more so than either Reno or Plan Bay area. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation, and we're available to answer questions.
And Antonio, just before you go to questions, I want to thank you for the opportunity to give this presentation. It's a dense subject matter. I want to say the Housing Methodology Committee itself, that was a region-wide, interjurisdictional exercise, took over a year just to get those first numbers. So it's not usually a short subject, but we try to boil it down for your purposes.
No, I really appreciate it, and thank you for coming with prepared materials. If you could share those with Kelly, who I believe you liaised with in terms of coordinating for this call, we'd appreciate it so we get added to our public materials for the public to consume. So I'll go ahead and call on questions. So Brian.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you, Waylon, and Joel. This is incredibly informative. So my questions are around how we use this for school planning. So there's several questions here, but there's, I've heard the RHNA has actually been used as thought of like, this is a growth projection, but it's not as you mentioned, a forecast. So I'm struggling with how best to use it. And are there any requirements on school districts related to RNHA or the various the housing targets? Any legal requirements? And how might we look at this for our capacity planning? Because we don't want to build empty schools, but we want to make sure we have capacity. So those are the areas I would love to get your insights on or thoughts on.
Some of those are quick answers and some are pretty involved. I'll try to do justice to them as best I can. So number one, to answer the easy one, the school district does not have a formal responsibility with respect to RENA. You don't have to produce a report to follow up on it. However, the ABAG projections specifically are more meaningful in terms of regional growth activity that's expected than the RENA. The RENA is a justification that we have the space should the market present the opportunities to build those units. I'll say in most of our RENA cycles, the units don't end up getting built on those specific parcels. Where there's a willing seller and a sort of other economic aspects that make it right, that's when units get built. And as much as the city plans, they don't happen, in as targeted ways. It's more about economics in my experience. Number two, when you're talking about how can we use the data, I think that's an excellent question, and I think that what it comes down to is a relationship that the school districts built with the city and vice versa. A long time ago, back when I think you were on the board, Member Gephardt, I remember having these meetings where we would go over this data in detail, pipeline data, during the triennial meetings between the school board and the Fremont City Council. And we would really look into where that growth was happening. And when the school district would do its assignments, kind of eyeballing pipeline growth and seeing where that might overwhelm a local attendance area at one or other levels of schooling. And so that development activity is intended to accomplish that, to help the school district understand when someone's coming forward to approval, we're providing that referral to the school district, and the school district is kind of keeping it in his files and saying, okay, 100 units, multifamily, here's a generation rate, that's in, pick one, Warm Springs Elementary. Okay, what's the space there? How long till we get there? Who are we going to assign to, et cetera. So that's the best use of data, is really the pipeline data, rather than this more esoteric, long regional growth. Though I think from a school planning standpoint, there may be some wisdom with your demographer in trying to make sense of that. That's as far as I can go with my city hat.
Thank you. And let me go ahead and call on Liz. We have 7 minutes left. So I will certainly take people to get back in queue to ask additional questions, but I will prioritize anybody who hasn't gone. Go ahead, Liz.
Yes, so Berkeley, City of Berkeley recently or is considering getting rid of single-family housing zoning. And I'm wondering if that is a strategy for their, RHNA or RHND as it might be. And if such a thing were to happen, obviously individual homeowner parcels may not be so large, but I've seen other developers pack them in. So what do you see as the potential for that happening in Fremont?
So Fremont has no such similar proposal on the table of its own accord. However, there are state laws proposed during the current legislative session that would do similar to what you're describing for Berkeley statewide, allow ministerial or no local discretion subdivision of single family housing throughout the state. Already in the state, every city is required to provide for a house, accessory unit, and then a third unit, a junior accessory unit on every single family's own property. And so if those individual households were to be, more and more in existing neighborhoods, then those neighborhoods in sort of a spread out way would, theoretically have more students coming to those schools. I don't know what'll happen with the state law with respect to allowing subdivision without city discretion. But something like that would add housing in a less targeted way. We've done our housing as what we call in our general plan strategically urban, which says, let's focus this housing near the transit stations where people can take BART, can take the bus, et cetera. Looking forward to doing that in a more sustainable way. But when you do that in existing neighborhoods, then it follows the pattern of that existing neighborhood, though it does intensify. So that's all I'll say. There are more cities doing that. San Jose also is looking at that. Berkeley, I think, actually did it, last week, or that was the headline I saw. I didn't look into it. So yes, that's a very real and increasing policy tied to equity and diversity objectives, as well as housing production.
So to follow up on that question, it makes it sound like single family homes would not be able to exist if they were zoned out. Do you mean exclusively single family homes? Could you give more context to what that means to eliminate single family homes zoning for the general public?
So single family properties are, 6,000, 8,000 square foot lots, most of them. Some are larger. And you think about something like, my subdivision in Irvington, you think about Glenmore, Cabrillo, other places around town. In each of those, if the state law were to pass, or if we would do something similar to one of these other cities of our own accord, each one of those lots would be able to be cut in half, right? And then you put another unit on the other lot, and then you don't have to provide parking in most instances. And so you now have two families in those examples. Now, that would, by the state law that's proposed, it would only be once. You couldn't do it again. But different cities have proposed different things. Some have said, well, you should be able to do a fourplex where each single family unit is, or maybe it depends on the lot size. So the objective there of that policy proposal by various jurisdictions around the state and by the state itself is to allow more intensity in existing neighborhoods, to provide more ability for people of less means to be able to purchase in those previously more exclusive areas. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so you can continue to build single family houses on single family house lots, but you can also choose to build multiple units on those lots.
Or intensify the existing single family house. Most of the cases, there's probably 24 or less vacant single family properties in Fremont. Most of them have a house. And so for the ones that didn't have one, they could, under that scenario. And again, I want to be clear, Fremont doesn't have such a current proposal, but there was both the proposal last legislative session that barely didn't make it, and then one this legislative session. And so this theme is becoming more common and is becoming more popular in different cities.
And then one last question before I turn back to Brian. Can you explain the connection between increasing density, or as you call it, intensification, and also increasing equity? And what was it? What was the other terminology that you used?
So the single family neighborhood is a relatively uniformly high cost area. And Fremont has a lot of single family neighborhoods with varying house prices. The question you asked, Liz Fisher and also Antonio, was related to Berkeley's proposal. Fremont doesn't have such proposal, but the thought behind that proposal is that if you were to allow subdivision of those lots, you would have relatively less expensive housing units within those existing neighborhoods, which would then make those neighborhoods more accessible to a wider range of income levels. There are concerns about speculation and price in the short term and long term, and that's all part of the discussion.
Brian?
Thank you. Following up on your comments about looking at the pipeline growth, do you know if that is essentially what our demographers are using in their demographer report?
Yes. So the demographers used to, so I've been with the district helping your demographers since it was back to school works and then cooperative strategies, and now I think Dolinger. And so we've been through a lot of them. The current demographer uses tract data, tract and parcel map data more than the previous ones, and ask for some detailed information about those dates and such. But by and large, they're taking our development activity, they're taking their analyses of birth and death rate and other data, and they're kind of putting it all together. They send us every February or March something called an SFNA kind of a form that goes in your school facilities needs assessment. And we fill it out to show the average unit sizes that have happened over the past year, and we'll identify those that data and give it back. And they mix that, not solely, but they mix that with other data.
Great, no, thank you. And then you mentioned ABAG numbers.
Sorry, Brian, if you want to extend for time, otherwise the time in the agenda item is complete.
I would like 3 more minutes. I had 2 more questions.
Antonio, might I ask as well, if you all still have additional questions and that we have not had an opportunity to address them in this forum, can you guys send them to us? And I will be more than happy to pass it on to Joel and Waylon, and they can then have a written response for us in lieu of having the opportunity to answer them tonight.
Sure thing. Do I have a second on Brian's proposal?
I second it.
All right, all in favor, please raise your virtual hand. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed?
I'm going to reduce it to 1 question. The other one I'll ask offline. But I was thinking about I wanted to know.
The ayes have it, Brian. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was jumping ahead, wasn't I? I was wondering how school capacity is considered in the housing element, and related to that, I see the priority development areas. So it seems like that's an area that we should be aware of and looking at what our school capacities are and as that evolves.
Yeah, so I can comment on that. I haven't seen in the documentation at the state or regional level the relative capacity of any one school district. We in Fremont happen to have a school district coterminous with our boundary, but that's not the case in many areas around the Bay Area and the state. And it would be extremely difficult, I think, for the state to consider that layout or those lines with respect to growth. They're looking macro. The state has this number, the ABAG 9-county Bay Area has this number, and then the methodology committee really creates the level below that. So that doesn't go to the school district level. They're looking big picture, and I don't know at the state level whether they have thought about the impacts and how to deal with them.
If I may clarify, I was more referring to like Waylon showed this slide with the corridor, the priority development areas for Fremont, and in our general plan, can we look at school capacities there and consider that as well as when we're looking at housing capacity to meet our NHA numbers?
That's a good point. And we'd be very willing to collaborate with the school district on that with specific respect to your attendance areas, be they elementary, middle school, high school, that overlap with those areas, and whether growth in those areas would lead to sort of haves and have-nots in terms of the school attendance areas. I think that's a really good point. There was previously some state laws that come to mind, SB 5902 being one of them, by Senator Wiener, that would have applied similar to the discussion we had about single family that didn't pass. But in this instance, more intensity by law on certain transit corridors, which would be very similar to our general plan. And so our general plan, we think, was groundbreaking in its sustainability initiatives to place those units there and also to preserve the character of existing single family neighborhoods. And so that's one objective. Balancing schools is another, I think, is important, and we're definitely willing to talk to you about that.
Thank you. Everything else I'll ask and follow up. Appreciate it. I appreciate it.
We have 50 seconds left on this item. So seeing no further hands, then we'll go ahead and close this item. I want to thank you both for taking the time to present to us. We really appreciate it. The honor is all ours. As I noted, the committee was really demanded and wanted to hear from you specifically as to housing developments. So we're flattered that you took the time to present to us and answer our questions. And we look forward to increased collaboration or continued collaboration between the city and the district on these matters. So thank you very much. And thank you, Kelly, for coordinating. Go ahead, Joel.
Welcome.
Can I just say, if anybody has any questions, you can always go to fremont.gov/planning and contact us and ask them or follow up, and we're happy to work with you.
Thank you guys so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And you're free to go, of course. Great. So now turning back to the agenda item. We were scheduled to hear the demographer's report, but as I noted, they're not able to attend, but they can, we'll coordinate to have them show up in April. So given that, we'll turn now to the staff update. And I've allotted 15 minutes and I'll hand it off to staff.
Thank you so much, Antonio. So first of all, I'm sorry that the demographer was unable to attend, but as I shared with you all earlier, he did have an emergency that he needed to deal with that didn't allow him to come. So please feel free to forward any questions that you guys have specifically about the demographer report, and he will answer those and be prepared to have a written response as well as come and discuss the report with us in April. So just get those questions to me at any time, and we'll make sure that we have formal responses for you all at our next meeting. The next thing that we have done this past month is we did complete the annual audit of the CBOC Measure E, the Measure E program, and reported out to the CBOC. Unfortunately, the CBOC only accepted the report this evening and did not have comments or questions. So I don't have a deep dive discussion necessarily to share with you all at this point, but we, in the future, will have the finalized audit report as well as their comments provided to you all for review. The audit that was completed was by Edie Bailey and Associates. They are our consultant that is our third-party auditor who annually, over the past 2 years, I believe, has done our audit of our financials for Measure E. The draft report was completed at the end of January, and staff in the administrative department looked at it, reviewed it, and made any comments, changes, updates with them at that time. Associate Superintendent Battle is with us tonight. He has actually formally accepted that audit and has taken no exception to it. There were no errors identified, and the report came back fully exceptional and without error. So we are happy to hear that, and I will turn it over to Associate Superintendent Battle if he has any additional comments, And you all, of course, are welcome to ask us any questions.
No, I don't have any additional comments. It was a clean audit, so we're very happy about that. Whenever you get a clean audit, so I don't really have anything else to say about it, Kelly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And once again, it will be presented to the board. I believe at our next board meeting, you all are welcome to download it at the board docs website or the district website. And if those that don't do it by our next meeting, if you all still require a copy of it, I will forward it to Antonio and he can distribute it to you all if you don't have an opportunity to see it when we have the board meeting next week. And that's all I have to report out on the CBOC.
So we may have over allotted time for the staff update. Correct, Kelly? Are there any other updates you'd like to provide? Otherwise, we can go ahead and move to the next part of our agenda, unless there are questions on the audit report. Oh, I see Cecily.
Yes, it's not the audit report, but in reference to the demographers report, is it correct that they do this every 3 years? I just can't remember.
Actually, it's done annually.
Oh, okay.
The city actually does their review and report every 3 years, but we do our demographers report annually. And the one thing that I wanted to provide clarification on with what Joel had stated, when the school district does its capacity reports, we only use the reference of the development studies as a point of reference. Our actual capacity reports are generated on a site-by-site annual review. So when we look at our capacity, we're looking at who is actually enrolled in that school at the time they register in August through December. Then in January and February, that information is collected, compiled, and then that then tells us what our capacity level is at each one of our school sites. It's not separate and independent. Well, it is separate and independent from any development issues, but we then take that information and weigh it against what the demographers report is doing to then come up with, you know, an analysis. So I wanted to make sure you guys understood that we don't take the city's information of housing and say, oh my God, that's exactly what we need. We actually take our organic data annually and go on site by site to generate what the actual capacity is of each site.
Let me just put a different spin on what you just said, Kelly, because it's sort of true, but what the demographers use is when they're looking at potential housing in Fremont and they are assigning students to those projected housing, they're going by permits. It has to actually be permits pulled for those homes. They're not going to put in a projection based on a plan. It has to actually be permits because they are able to project when those students will come to us based on the development of those projects once the permits are pulled. So as a clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Battle. So, but that's all I wanted to add to that. And I don't have any other staff updates other than the construction program is moving along very well. And we have not had any major roadblocks or boulders that have crossed our path this particular month, but not to say they won't happen, but we've done a very good job of steering the course and keeping everything moving. So that's all I wanted to share with you guys on that.
And moving forward, I'll look to add a general Q&A to the staff update so that questions about topics that weren't immediately presented on are in order for our agenda purposes. I think that'll be a good approach to ensure that Ms. McMahon can answer questions about anything within the scope of this committee. Obviously, to the extent she needs to follow up, she's free to do so. Okay, seeing nothing else for this item, we can go ahead and move to the air quality COVID plus fire season. Before I hand it over, let me make sure I add the time. So the purpose of this item was at the request of one of the committee members to talk about air quality, not just for purposes of the pandemic, but also because of the impacts that wildfires have on classrooms. And I want to turn it over at first to Mr. Arthur, I believe, and just generally district staff. Mr. Fung, one of the committee members, did share some of the concerns that educators have raised about ventilation, and I think this is a great opportunity for the district to be able to respond to those concerns and share that information more widely with the community, and so that this can be a point of resource. And I believe that's in the item that was shared with you. There was a survey and then a list of concerns by educators. Henry, were the questions that you provided to Mr. Arthur just by email?
Yeah, just by email. I sent it to Kelly for her staff. So
Okay.
I can definitely mention what those questions are, but I can let Kelly and her staff give us an update first.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and now open it up to Mr. Arthur, and then to the extent that we want to address those questions first, or the committee would rather do its own Q&A, I'll take the committee's direction on that approach. So go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to say, thank you, Henry. We received that information this evening. And so I did forward it to Kevin. And so I'm hoping that we will be able to address a lot of the questions that Henry shared with you all, hopefully before the end of the week. So I just wanted to let you know we did receive them and I did forward them on, and I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Yeah, so I haven't had a chance to look at the questions that you forwarded. I did look through the survey that you sent to us. And I would like to point out that it's a difficult survey to follow for the one reason that there were no room numbers mentioned at all in the survey. So it's almost like an anonymous complaint. We have concerns from different teachers, I'm guessing, at different sites, which may be valid concerns, but we have no way of following up on those concerns because room locations were not part of at least the one that I saw did not have room numbers.
And Mr. Arthur, real quick. So Henry can share that information for the purposes of sharing it with the public. I asked him to remove information, but obviously for purposes of advancing, and I would ask Henry to forward that information over to you.
Yes, yeah, I sent it to Kelly already. I think the second email that Kelly's sending to you does have a room number. The purpose of we put the room numbers and the teacher's name on there, we want to make sure there's no duplicates. Because a lot of times when teachers accidentally click twice, there might be duplicates of the survey results. So I did use that to remove any duplicates before I send it to you.
Okay, yeah, that would be appreciated. Once we get that, then we can have our staff investigate those concerns and provide a future report for you.
Okay. I mean, in the meantime, can we talk about some of those main concerns at this time? Or can we receive some of the updates? I know that from the last board meeting we did that the board members were able to approve the purchase of the air purifiers, and then we want to see if there's any updates on the MERV 13 filters. Have they been placed in all the classrooms yet? So can we start with are there any updates from the district staff?
Sure.
Apologies, Kevin. I totally mean to hand you the floor. I just wanted to flag that those questions had come, but I thought they had come earlier. So I certainly don't want to put that on you to respond today. Like Kelly said, those responses can come over the course of the week. If you want to just give a general update, we would appreciate that before we go into Q&A. Thank you.
Sure. So at the previous board meeting, the board did approve the purchase of 1,500 high quality air filtration units. These are portable units that will be placed in every classroom throughout the district. Our intent is to be able to secure them in some way, either on the wall or to the floor, so that they won't they won't be persuaded to walk away. They're valuable, so we are going to make every effort to make sure they stay in the room that they're put in. They will be marked and inventoried per school site, per room. We anticipate that these units will greatly enhance the air purification that we're trying to produce in the classrooms for the staff and students. Those were purchased. We have received half of them. We are receiving the other half tomorrow and on Friday. They will be stored and in a secure location until we are ready to start distributing those as staff come back to their classrooms. We do have, part of that order was fast shipped to us, and we received 25 of those units yesterday. Those are now being placed in the classrooms that are being used as learning hubs starting Monday morning. So those will be distributed tomorrow and Thursday and finalized on Friday if need be. So that's where we are as far as the air purification units. For filters, we have installed MERV 11 filters at 7 of our sites throughout the district. We've currently also ordered the remainder of the sites for to replace with the MERV 11 filters. We're highlighting one site with the MERV 13 filters. The issue that when we get into the MERV 13, it goes from a 4-ply filter into a pleated box filter. Those are made in standard sizes. We cannot get those in custom sizes. So when those get installed, there has to be some modification to the units where the filters sit, the racks and things. We have to add spacers. We have to use tape and things like that to help stop any air bypass around those box filters since they are standard sizes. The MERV 11 filters fit completely tight in our units. So our anticipation is every site that can handle the MERV 11 filters, we will put those in. And with the combination of that and the air purification units that are being installed throughout the district, we're pretty confident that we're going to have a really good, clean work area for students and staff. And that's all the update I have for you.
Okay.
Thanks. I'll take any members in the queue to please raise your hand. So I'll take first member questions before asking any of my own. Cecily?
I just wanted to ask why, I have a few questions, I guess. Why is there some areas that need the MERV 13 filter? And then as far as the air purifiers go, if they're being stored at a secure site until we need them, my assumption is that school is going to be resuming in some form before the end of the month so that FUSD is eligible for the money that allegedly will be available. Is there a plan to be able to get the humidifiers out, or sorry, not humidifiers, the air purifiers out fast enough that that wouldn't be a cause to delay the hybrid from going forward? Those are my two questions.
So I'll take that one first. Yes, we have staff to distribute the air purifiers. That's not a concern of ours. And then your question about the MERV 13, can you repeat that? What was your concern with that?
I'm just curious why are most sites getting the MERV 11 and then some of them are getting the MERV 13? It sounded like just a few, but what is the change in the filter? What's the cause of that?
So most of our HVAC systems are 15 to 20 years old. We are not confident that they will survive the higher efficiency filters, because what happens is it greatly reduces the airflow because it's such a high efficiency filter. And once the airflow gets reduced to a certain point, you will no longer have the ability to cool and or heat the room properly. So we're trying to get to a nice balance where we can still maintain the required temperature that is in the classrooms with allowing the best filtration that we possibly can. And that again was the reason we wanted to supplement the whole process with these portable air purifiers.
Thank you. Liz?
Actually, I got so engrossed in that last question, I think I started to forget what I was going to ask. So this is actually a question directed towards Henry because he did poll the educators and the some of the responses seem to be word for word the same. So I'm assuming that the survey had like a multiple choice kind of thing, so that they ticked off whatever issues and then perhaps maybe added any specific things that weren't represented. Okay, I see you nodding your head. So
That's correct.
okay. All right. Thank you. That's really all I wanted to know. I guess some of these teachers haven't been in the classroom, so their familiarity with their issues is a little foggy, perhaps in some cases. So anyway, but
Yeah, so I mean, one of the questions we did ask on the survey is, did teachers able to put in a work order with the admin? So we did ask about that too, and then try to get updates from administrators to see if there's any updates. But the thing is, what they've been saying, I mean, the main concerns a lot of the teachers were saying was that they didn't know if there's the air filters have been replaced or not, because the HVAC system in our classrooms, we can't open it ourselves, so we cannot see if the filters have been replaced. And there's been teachers who said that the filters haven't been replaced for a couple of years. So I want to see if there's a way that teachers can have a way to be able to see if the filters have been replaced, and that way we can let the district staff and administrators to put in the work order to have the filters replaced. But it sounds like right now, sounds like from what Kevin said, there's 7 sites have been replaced with the new filters. But there are close to 42 schools at our site, in our district. So is there a timeline on when the other schools will get their filters then?
No, we do not have a timeline. The filters are on order. As you might imagine, there's a huge need for these, or a want for these, I should say. So our supplier is working the best that they can to get the filters to us.
So would it be possible that schools will open without their filters replaced already? Because I mean, I'm guessing the district is going to prioritize the elementary school first, because they might be opening earlier than the secondaries. But so would it be possible that I mean, would the air purifiers be enough if the filters haven't been replaced yet?
So
just for a point
me,
of a clarification, Kevin. So
Sure.
when we're talking about filters, are we talking about the air filters for the HVAC as opposed to purifiers, which are the standalone units that are going to be placed in the classroom and, as Kevin mentioned, secured? That's the distinction, right, between filters and purifiers?
correct.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Kevin. Go ahead.
So the air filters in the HVAC units are replaced regularly. They're replaced 2 to 3 times per year. You may not know they're replaced, and we do not want staff tearing into units to look and make sure filters are replaced. That would be dangerous and could be costly for damages that are created. We do have records of the filters that are replaced. Everything's documented on our work order system, so there's no question about when or how the filters were replaced. And again, we cannot guarantee when filters will come in. We are confident, though, with the portable air purifiers that with or without the MERV 11 filters, we're going to have a good air quality in the room.
Okay, thank you. I mean, just to follow up, I mean, I totally understand why you don't want teachers to be able to open up the and check the filters. But the thing is, because everything is so centralized in terms of control, so teachers, we can't, like in terms of the, we can only change the temperature between like 68 to 74 degrees, and that's it. We have no way to check to see if the air is on setting to recirculate the air versus bringing fresh air in. So is there a way that that the district will be able to give the teachers control? And then another thing is we will be able to save the district money too, because a lot of times we see that the HVAC system are on like even at night or on weekends. If as teachers we have the control on those, we'll be able to turn them off when we leave the classrooms. Is there any way that the district can give the teachers control to be able to, especially this next year, we want to make sure these HVAC systems are working and be able to bring fresh air in, and also to save district money in terms of energy bill? Would that be possible?
Short answer is no, that would not be possible. Our systems are very expensive systems, and the software that runs them, the EMS management, energy management system, has the way to control those. And if people go in there and start messing with them and fiddling around with filters and trying to make the thermostats work, it could throw off the units and could cause damage. So there are district standards for heating and cooling. You mentioned 6874. It's actually 6878 for heating and cooling. And our directive has been to keep, by the board, is to keep the rooms heated and cooled in within those parameters.
Okay. Not sure. Antonio, you want to see if anyone else have questions?
Yeah,
first?
I want to make sure I entertain more questions. Just one second.
Okay.
So before I return to other speakers, if I could go ahead and ask a few questions. My understanding, Kevin, is that MERV 11 is not able to filter out particulates the size of a virus. Is that correct?
I do not have the knowledge to answer that. I don't know.
Okay, that is my understanding. That's why MERV 13 is needed. But that being said, that's why we turn to other mitigation measures, for example, opening windows, installing air purifiers, obviously social distancing, maintaining distance, et cetera. There are various mitigation measures in place in order to make an area safer. When it comes to the air purifiers, without the air purifiers, what is the changes in of air per hour that a room experiences?
I would have to get that information back to you. I don't have that at my fingertips right now. There are code requirements for fresh air to be brought into the room, and it is a cubic foot amount of air per occupant. And I want to say it's 15, but don't quote me on that because that may not be correct. I can certainly get that information and report back at a future time for you.
Yeah, so my there, just to the rest of the committee, there was a great New York Times article on ventilation specifically in a school setting. And I would highly recommend it to the committee. Had I had access to it before sending out the agenda, I would have encouraged everyone to read it. Given that the focus is on this virus being airborne, air mitigation measures are quite important. And so in terms of, I also want to reframe some of the results of the survey for the members of the committee. As we talk about Measure E, for example, and this was back in 2014, and I'm sure Brian can step in and give necessary context, the district identified $1.4 billion worth of need, and we were only able to raise at the time $650 million worth of funds. So when there are issues raised about facilities, we do want to notice the delta between the need and the money raised, right? So I think that should give some necessary context to the funds that we have available to address the various needs. Moving to a point that Henry raised about filter replacement. I noticed when I step into an elevator, I'm able to see when it was last inspected. Given the concern about air, is that a measure that would be cost effective or potentially allow for a reduction in concerns and worries, Mr. Arthur, as to when the filter was last replaced? Is that something that you think would be useful?
Oh, sure. That would be very easy to do. We could mark the unit in some way with a sticker or somehow stating when the filter was last changed. Absolutely.
Got it. And I am taking comments from any new members, and I will circle back. So thank you, Liz, for that comment. Okay, so that would be a cost-effective way to potentially allay concerns. So I asked about the air changes per hour before we install an air purifier. Do you happen to know how many air changes per hour with the air purifier in place?
Yes, excluding the excluding the unit that is already in the school building, our existing HVAC unit. If we don't count that, the portable air purifiers exchange the air 5 times per hour.
Awesome. And that's given the volume of the room, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I have a few more questions, but I'll hand it back to people in queue. Cecily?
Yes, I just wanted to hear a little more specifically about portables and the air quality and COVID. We have quite a few schools who have high percentages of portables, and I'm just wondering if there's a concern with reopening and usage of portables versus usage of the standalone buildings.
I have no concerns with that.
I guess just as a follow-up question, is that like a school site concern that a teacher could use, or that like is there any data or any source of ability to resolve concerns if a teacher feels like their building might have inferior air quality because it's a portable? Because like,
Absolutely.
for instance, the school my son goes to has over 50% portables. Some are temporary. Most of them are temporary, and so I just would want to know if that's a concern that can be raised and justified for air quality and returning kids to school.
Absolutely. So I would suggest that you have people with concerns to talk to their school site principal. They can enter a work order in our work order system. That would get tracked back to our indoor air quality team. We have a group of guys that work in our maintenance department who have been trained on indoor air quality as far as identifying the issues, tracking the issues, and at times we bring in other people to help us come to a result if we can't figure out what the issues are. But we absolutely are open to anybody, any concerns you might have.
Cecily, if you don't mind, maybe I can give context to that question and maybe in the spirit which you're asking it. Kevin, are you able to highlight some of the positives of portables when it comes to air circulation as compared to shared spaces? I know we've spoken about this issue before. I believe portables do not share their air with other rooms. Is that correct?
That is correct. And actually the portables are most of the portables are the classrooms that are not controlled by our EMS, energy management system. So the teachers in the portable classrooms often do have full control over their HVAC units. Some of them have been modified so that is not the case anymore. Oftentimes what will happen is those units might get left on and after hours on weekends where they cannot be controlled by energy management. So it can be a waste of energy, and that is a concern of ours as well. So some of them have been retrofitted with wireless controllers, thermostatic controllers, so that we can control them wirelessly, but they are not tied into the energy management system that controls the whole school district.
If you don't mind, if I second that, yeah, definitely in the portable, a lot of teachers who want to teach in portable, that's actually one of the reasons why, is because they can control the AC, and also a lot of times those are the classrooms that actually do have windows that can open. Whereas if you can see the survey result, up to 60% of our teachers are in the classrooms. If they're in the main buildings, they actually don't have any windows that can open for ventilations. So that's actually is one of the advantages in the portables. But I do have to say that.
And Henry, if I may, if you could just wait for Q, I wasn't going to call you.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no,
Right,
that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I would just allude back to conversations we had when wildfires were ongoing, where there were certain benefits to being in a portable, to be able to control your airflow in a portable as compared to a fixed classroom. And those benefits seem to be shared in this context as well. And I'll prioritize Brian as he hasn't raised his hand on this topic. Brian?
I was going to ask if the air quality, if any changes have been made to our program standards around air quality that we're using in the long range facilities plan update.
Sorry, Brian, I didn't fully hear that question, or was it a statement?
It was a question. Have our program standards changed around air quality, i.e., are we going to add to the list of needs, upgrading all facilities to support MERV 13 or whatever? I'm not sure what that
That's something Kevin and I are going to discuss with the cabinet as it relates to the long range facilities plan, because that dives into what I was talking about in CBOC and the standards and looking at district standards. So we don't really have an answer for you on that, but it is a topic of discussion that we are talking about, but I don't have an answer as to what our policy will be or what the inclusion of that will be at this time.
And one quick follow-up would be probably helpful for all of us. I don't know if this exists to get a sense for how expensive a decision like that would be to upgrade all of our facilities. So I don't have any concept of what we're talking about either. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. That's a comment. That's not a question. Thank you.
And with time expired, I'll take motions to the extent that people wish to make additional questions to extend for time.
I want to make a motion for additional 5 minutes and also look into maybe forming a subcommittee that we can work with Kevin, Kelly, and their staff to and get updates on the HVAC and the ventilation issues.
So I'll take the first part of your motion as in order, and then if we extend for time, you're free to make a subsequent motion. Do I have a second on extending time for 5 minutes?
I'll second.
Okay, so all in favor, thanks, Cecily. All in favor of extending time for 5 minutes, please raise your hands, virtual or physical. Thank you. Please lower your virtual or physical hands. All opposed? Thank you. Go ahead, Henry. Sorry about that.
Yes. So yeah. Sorry that Kevin. Sorry that your staff weren't able to get the questions ahead of time. So if there would there be a way we can set up a subcommittee of like a couple members, 2 or 3 members that we can meet with the district staff and also go through the survey even in more detail, the survey that we sent out to the teachers. And also one thing we want to see is the other union, the CSEA and also the I want to see if their members also have see if their members who also have would like to do a survey and see how their ventilation is. See if there's something we can address as well. But my motion is to see if we can form a subcommittee on to work with Kelly and Kevin and their staff on to look at these issues a little bit more detail.
Sure. And so just to help form the motion, so you're proposing the creation of a subcommittee to address the topic of ventilation. You mentioned the other labor units. Would that be part of the membership, or was that a separate point?
Just to see if any of them will be interested to join this subcommittee, I guess.
Okay, but that's not part of the motion.
No.
Understood. Okay. So Henry's motion is to create a subcommittee to address the issue of ventilation and to work with district staff on this topic. Did that accurately capture your motion, Henry? All right. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Cecily. So all in favor of creating a subcommittee to address the topic of ventilation and work with district staff on this topic? All in favor, please raise your hand. Virtual or physical? Thank you. Please lower your hands. Thank you. All opposed? Thank you. So the ayes have it, and we'll address, first I want to go to Mr. Battle, who may have a question or comment, and then I'll address the specifics of either filling the subcommittee or, I mean, that would be the main thing that we would want to do. Go ahead, Mr. Battle.
Yeah, I just wanted to ensure the FAC that the districts will make sure that all of our rooms are ready. That was part of the reason and rationale that we did purchase the air purifiers to help support that. So we have every confidence that the classrooms will be ready for our students. They will be safe for our teachers. And that's why we are taking, the board invested over $1 million in air purifiers. And that's why we've made a large purchase of filters, and our staff has been changing filters. And as Kevin said, all the sites cannot accept a MERV 13 filter. And based on the evidence that we've seen, MERV 11 along with the air purifier, will do a significant job in those classrooms. So and we will work with a subcommittee to address any concerns that they have. I think Kevin said that it would be fairly easy to put a date of when those filters were changed, so that those teachers know when those filters were changed last. I just want you guys to know that we are going to do everything in our power, and we are confident that the classrooms will be ready whenever the call is made to bring students back to school. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Battle. I had a few questions before we move to filling the subcommittee for Mr. Arthur, and obviously these could potentially be addressed in this subcommittee. Is the plan to rely on, as Mr. Battle said, MERV 11s where available, if not MERV, whatever it be, plus the air purifiers, and thus keep windows closed, or in certain spaces, keep windows open plus fans? What is the approach? Because my understanding is the air purifiers don't work with open windows. What are the mitigation efforts in mind?
My studying on this matter suggested that one window in each classroom be cracked open 2 or 3 inches, just to allow for a little bit of air movement. We also have, we didn't talk about this, but outside air intake on our existing HVAC units. Normally they bring in about 20 to 30% outside air. We have now opened those up more than that. Some sites have up to 50% outside air coming in. And again, we have to closely monitor this because like having a very restrictive filter on there, MERV 11 or MERV 13, that does affect the ability of the unit to heat and cool the air. So where you might be getting more fresh air, you will most likely have a room that is not comfortable to stay in because of the temperature of the room.
Thank you. And so now I'll just take volunteers for this subcommittee, keeping in mind that the maximum size of any subcommittee has to be less than a majority of the committee. We generally do not face that concern. All right, so if anybody who is interested in serving in this subcommittee could please raise their hands. Thank you. I see 3 hands. Are there any other individuals? Great, 4 hands. Remember, everybody, we can't get to 8. But other than that, the ceiling is ours. All right. So seeing that, we have now formed a subcommittee of 4 individuals. So that's Cecily, Henry. Oh my, when you lowered your hands, I lost you. Malia and Judy, I think. Yes, thank you. And just as a reminder, I serve as ex officio on the subcommittees. So please do coordinate to create a meeting and include me in those in that planning. All right, so that exhausts our time for ventilation. Thank you for the discussion. I want to check in on the committee. Just a second while I find the agenda. We now are planning to go to the demographic subcommittee. I did speak to Brian ahead of time, in part to do a check-in because it is 9 p.m., but we only have 15 minutes allotted for this. We can either potentially bring it back along with demographics presentation, but I do understand that Brian would like the subcommittee to get direction. Brian, what is your, in large part because you were leading this effort, that's why I want to get your request. What would your preference be at this time to propose to the committee? Or should we just continue to thank you, Mr. Arthur. Oh, apologies. Before we move on to the demographic subcommittee, thank you so much, Mr. Arthur, for joining the committee and answering our questions. We look forward to working with you on this topic.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
So to answer your question, Antonio, I would, assuming the fact is okay with that, I'd love to do a minor amount of framing for this topic, and then probably bring it back for a fuller discussion next time, assuming there's interest in the FAC. I definitely want to watch the timer.
And we have ended committee meetings at 9:30 before, so it's possible that we can entertain all of it. But but again, you know, it's I leave it to you all to decide that. Let me pivot over back to Brian to present on this item. As of right now, I'll allot the 15 minutes with the goal of having direction from the committee. And to, if you could go ahead and frame the discussion for us, Brian, and get us started on this discussion, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Happy to. Let me share my screen. Get the technology part of this working well first. Are people able to see my screen? Let me just confirm that.
Yep.
So I guess I wanted to start. So the Long Range Facility, the LFRP update and demographic subcommittee did a bunch of research and put together a report. It's a fairly lengthy report, which I was going to share a slight executive summary of tonight. But I wanted to check in, first check in to see, maybe by raise of hands, how many of you had an opportunity to spend time with the report, just to kind of get a temperature check for how, you know.
Please raise your
if you
virtual or physical hand.
So
Thank you.
I'll kind of start with the ask, and then so you guys have that in context, and then just a couple highlights of the report, and then take Q&A just to get direction. But the ask obviously was to get to present the executive summary, take questions, seek the fact permission to accept the report, and you know, share it with the board and staff more widely. It is already a public document, but to get some acceptance for the fact of this, and then there's the topics to consider. That's where I think the go-do is in terms of like, where do we go with this information? So keep that in mind, and I'll highlight a few things in the report. I'll also note that that we did correspond with Kelly, and she did share this with the demographer to kind of confirm the numbers. And so I think it's always a good idea to make sure there were no mistakes in the preparation and analysis of the numbers. So in fact, if anybody wants to see more detail on the research or the calculations behind this, more than happy to make that available. The more eyes, the better. So the executive summary tried to kind of pull everything together in terms of our decline in enrollment, and it is significant, right? A decline of 7.7% is what's projected over the next 7 years. And 75% of that decline is at the elementary level, TK through 5, and it's pretty clear that it's the drop in birth rates, and I'll show an image of that. And at least by the calculation I made, if we hadn't seen that drop in birth rates, we probably would have 2,000 more students than we do now. Another driver of the significant drop is our kindergarten capture rate, right? And it's fairly complicated, but one of the key things that are looked at is you know, how many births there were 5 years earlier, and how many kindergartners we see, and what percentage. But what percentage of those births do we see? You know, is it those exact births? No, but that's a proxy for how many kindergartners we're getting. I think, and this is, I think we also see our school utilization rate is going to drop sharply, although perhaps unevenly throughout the district. And you know the number, our enrollment versus our program capacity, and I will acknowledge that there's significant challenges in terms of, you know, conversations around how you measure program capacity. But even at a gross level, we're seeing a significant drop there. And tying it back to the development, and this item is straight from the demographer's projections. Of the 4,800 new homes, as Mr. Battle mentioned, those are permits pulled, but of the 4,800 new homes projected, there are 974 students out of that. So it's a relatively small factor when compared to the birth rate. And then there's a really fascinating study in the Public Policy Institute of California across from last February that projected a decrease in enrollment of approximately 7% across all of California public schools over the next 10 years. And we're very much in line with that. And then that report also shared that most of these declines are large and long lasting. So this is a significant thing we're going to be dealing with as a district. As I know Mr. Battle and others in staff have mentioned in board meetings and whatnot as well. And other districts in our area have seen similar declines. And so there's a lot more background in the report on those insights, but then the kind of the topics though. So where do we go from here? And the topics, at least from a subcommittee standpoint, and be interested in other topics. But returning to the FAC adopted facilities priorities, which unfortunately are buried deeper in the report. An interesting idea around increasing enrollment. I know that's been a topic I've heard discussed at the board meeting, right? Some of these specialty programs like management immersion, could they attract students? Or I think another interesting topic is how do kindergarten's kind of optional. So how can we attract more kindergartners? Another example. I think we have a lot of small elementary schools, and that's definitely issue worth looking at. How we fully utilize our facilities, and the impact in other areas, the impact of any potential program change we want to consider, such as reduced class size or all-day kindergarten. And I know with our current budget situation, it seems maybe not a near-term goal, but that may be a long-term goal that we and the board and the staff may want to try and set. Let me see. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I guess maybe
you have 8 minutes for the item, so I think you're good on time.
I think probably at this point it's best to take Q&A and feedback. It's probably the best use of the time at this point. It's like unless people are interested in me walking through some of the more highlights of the report. But
why don't we jump to Q&A, and if we hit a lull in Q&A, then we can return back to the report. Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I think this is really helpful information, Brian. And I think one of the things, that's come to my attention over a number of years is that kindergarten capture rate. And we know that part of the reason why we don't capture all of our kindergartners is because we have half-day programs. And folks who need a full-day program look for that. Some of them come back in first grade, but some of them who go to another option stick with that option. And I think as we see capacity increasing over the district, we really need to start taking a look at full-day kindergarten and when it will be possible for us to do that. I think this will take board direction. And we know it's not as simple for expanding kindergarten capacity as, oh, we've got extra classrooms, because we know kindergarten classrooms are equipped differently than other classrooms, and they need access to the proper playground. So it's not just, oh, there are more classrooms. They have to be retrofitted and potentially add playground space, or at least access to the kindergarten playground space. But I think that's something that will, that will address a lot of issues, I think, in our district. It'll utilize our space better. It will increase the attractiveness for families who leave the district or don't come to the district because we don't have full-day kindergarten. And I'm hoping we'll have board right now, fires are burning and we're dealing with a crisis, but at some point we need to start taking a look at this, because it's not something that we can turn around in a year or even two. This is going to take planning, and it needs to start probably fairly soon.
Thank you. And Liz, your hand up reminds me, do any members of the subcommittee also wish to weigh in their capacity as members of the subcommittee or as members of the committee? Liz?
Well, I guess I could say both.
Great.
In that, you know, as I get information, I feed it to Brian, but I also would like to tag on, you know, Diane's comment about full day kindergarten. I think, if I'm not mistaken, and Kelly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that kindergarten classes have to have bathroom facilities. But if that's not the case,
You are correct.
okay.
Each classroom has to have a single bathroom, or if they have 2 classrooms that have a Jack and Jill setup, you have to have the appropriate size of toilets and sinks to accommodate the joint use.
Right, right. So that's another complication in terms of capacity, because as Diane said, not every classroom can become a kindergarten classroom. And putting in a bathroom is not an inexpensive, you know, modernization, as it were. But we talk about generation rates, and it's not always tied to birth rates, because there are families that opt not to have their kids be in kindergarten in the public schools. You know, some may choose private kindergarten, or not have kindergarten at all. Maybe they decide to homeschool for kindergarten. But you know, when it comes to immigration, we think, well, as it was stated in the report, there are people leaving California and maybe not as many people coming in. But policies like immigration policies can also affect population growth in California, and that being maybe more of a national policy than really a state-specific policy maybe. But you know, we are in a new administration now, so some of these kinds of influences on our country we may find that they'll cause some different reactions or changes. So anyway, just some thoughts as a committee member, you know, as it regards, you know, looking at our enrollment and the factors that influence it.
Thank you, Liz. A couple questions that I have, Brian. I assume the subcommittee's recommendation is to accept the report as written, correct?
Correct.
Are there any action items or recommendations that are embedded within the report that thus by accepting of the report, the committee would be accepting those recommendations?
No, it purposely stayed informational, and we're looking for the FAC to give, you know, for us to give direction as the FAC body about where to explore solutions. So I don't believe so. There was anything. Try not, yeah.
No, thank you for that. And then there was a comment about, or in your presentation, you mentioned while there is overall decline in enrollment that is not necessarily uniform across the district. And then obviously connecting this with the presentation that we heard earlier from the city of Fremont, we do expect population growth along the transit corridor of Fremont, and that impacts certain, you know, elementary schools and, you know, associated upper level schools. How did this report contextualize that growth that's not uniform across the district when it comes to the impact that it has on those neighboring schools?
No particular analysis at the school level. It was just at the macro level, looking at the major trend, right? And it's clearly the big factor is birth rate decline, right? The student generation rate from development is a much smaller factor. So I think that would be worth, and perhaps maybe the demographer can help with this too, is looking if there are hotspots based on the permits pulled. And certainly, I certainly am interested. It would be interested in looking at the housing element and our schools near the housing element and what that looks like as well.
And so seeing no one in queue and us exhausting our time, it now forces the motion of whether or not to accept the subcommittee's recommendation of accepting this report. So that is the motion before us to accept this report as written. My understanding is that after acceptance, the subcommittee would like me to share this report with the board. Is that correct?
Yes.
Got it. And then at that time, we would then post the report on our website. So all in favor of accepting the report as drafted and shared with us in our agenda, please raise your virtual or physical hand. I still see hands going up, so I'll pause. Okay, please lower your physical or virtual hand. All opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. There was a request from the subcommittee to have direction from the committee. I don't know that we've gotten there, but in order to do so, we would need to extend for time. There were a few points raised within our discussion, but to the extent that we wish to give the subcommittee further direction, we would have to extend for time.
So I would move for 2 minutes of time just to summarize the direction that I've heard so far, I guess.
Given the request is for 2 minutes, I'll switch it and just take it without objection. Is there any objection to extending time for 2 minutes for purposes of giving the subcommittee direction? Seeing none, if I could take members in the queue. One point I would like to raise is that point that we talked about, given the unequal nature of growth and growth that happens along transit hubs. What impact would that have despite the macro trend of declining enrollment? And Brian, are you speaking as a member of the committee? I'm just playing. Go ahead.
I will. Well, the first comment is myself, and then the second comment is trying to sum it up. I'd like to explore our small elementary school sizes. I think that is the residential numbers I've seen are quite frightening at 7 years, and so I think we need to look at how to better balance the populations, I think. The second thing is summarizing kind of the follow-up for the subcommittee would be that I've heard is full day kindergarten as an option to potentially increase enrollment. What to do about too many small elementary schools. Looking at unequal development growth. Looking at the housing, looking at how to work with the city on the housing element. And then I think then I'd like to have a discussion with staff to understand how best to collaborate with staff on this, because I think and get staff's input on this as well, so we can that's kind of
yeah. So got it. So the way I would do this is I would either take direction on breaking these elements out per item or as a package. So what I heard was small elementary school sizes and full day kindergarten, unequal development growth, working with the city on a housing element, and then all within the context of being able to work with staff on addressing these 4 topics. So I want to get consensus. And Liz, do you have a question or comment?
Well, I don't believe that the housing element is going to, it's a bit removed from actual generation and actual building. It's a planning document, and it shapes policy, but it's not determinative. And so therefore I don't think that it's going to be necessary to focus on it that much.
I'm going to take that comment to break these items up and then get quick votes on whether that's the direction we wish to give the subcommittee to explore. And just for purposes of time, I'll try to do so quickly. If people would like to debate or discuss the individual items, we would need to extend for time. But otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and put the single elements and ask if that's part of the direction that you wish to give the subcommittee. So the first one is the size of elementary schools as they get to be overly small. I believe that would be an accurate characterization. So all in favor of giving the subcommittee direction to explore that topic? Please raise your hands, your virtual or physical hands. All right, lower your hands. The ayes have it regardless, but I'll just do it anyways. Any opposed? Don't mean to prejudice these votes, but next topic, full day kindergarten. Please raise your hands if this is a direction you would like to give the subcommittee to explore. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? Got it. Unequal development growth. So please raise your hand if you're in favor of giving the subcommittee direction on this topic. Go ahead, Liz.
Okay. Again, much like the regional housing plan, it's theoretical, I suppose. You know, we can anticipate a certain amount of growth, but we need to be looking at like permitted developments. And so just as a proviso for this item.
So I'd like to, given that we're going into potential discussion, but I would like to respond, but I don't quite remember how to do it. Do we have any objections to having 2 minutes worth of discussion on this topic? Seeing none. So Liz, my understanding is that along transit, there's far less local control when it comes to developing housing around those areas. And when we look at sites like Parkmont, we continue to have issues with capacity so that students who are residents there don't necessarily get to attend there. And then that goes back to the discussion that we've had about overcapacity and how to address that. So while not even needing to look at the permitted numbers, we know that we have limited local control when it comes to those transit areas. And so despite the fact that we may have, you know, a lack of enrollment towards the outsides of the city, we may have growth in the middle of the city along those transit corridors. And so if we only look at this topic from the macro lens of declining enrollment, that may lead us to conclusions that at a more local level would not be warranted. So that's why I think that should be a topic that should be explored by the subcommittee. Any further feedback or comments? I think we have like a minute. Bill, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight that, you know, going back to the presentation we received earlier from the city of Fremont, is that, you know, that's a really good tool to use for the district when we look at building permits that are granted and how much development there is in the area. Because there is a correlation between new housing units being built and enrollment. However, The subcommittee here, I think, did a really good job and some strong work with highlighting some of the things we need to consider, and that there is a gap. And so, from a macro perspective, yes, we were seeing that there's a decrease in enrollment, but maybe this subcommittee can reach out to the City of Fremont planners and say, okay, we're looking at some of this macro information that shows there is a potential decline in enrollment, and you can do a deeper dive into maybe what grades those are. And say, what are you guys looking at in terms of developers that are coming into the city? We're granting permits. It could be 100-unit complexes, 200-unit complexes. They're going to build those things based on what they're forecasting, whether they're 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, because they know that their families are going to move in there. And so whether or not those are high school age children versus elementary school age children, there is a correlation there. But some of the information we're looking at tonight is almost contradictory in nature. And so I think that there's a gap there we might need to fill. And so I think perhaps this committee can reach out to city planners and say, kind of try to connect the dots with the information we're looking at.
And just for clarity, is that in support, or we're talking about unequal development growth, and we've also exhausted time, so I'll only ask this one question for clarity. Is that we were talking about unequal development growth, and then next we're talking about work with the city on the housing element. Your comment was with respect to which item?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute the latter.
Oh, okay. So that'll be within that element. Okay, so all in favor of giving the subcommittee direction on unequal development growth, please raise your virtual or physical hand. Okay, please lower your hands. All opposed? Got it. And now we're going to talk about, and not talk about, we're going to vote on, but if we need to discuss, we're going to do working with the city on the housing element. And we could take Will's comment to apply to that subcommittee direction. Seeing no other hands in queue, then I'll go ahead and ask for the vote, whether to include that in the direction to the subcommittee, working with the city on the housing element. All in favor, please raise your hands. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? Got it. Okay, so maybe I should have done it as a group. All the topics pass. So I believe the subcommittee now has its direction. And now we'll move on to thoughts on future meeting topics. After 5 minutes, we'll get to adjourn, unless we extend. But any thoughts on future meeting topics? Henry.
Yes, we'd like to see if we can continue discussion and get updates on the HVAC and ventilation issues. And the other thing is I would like to see if there's the CBOC and the Measure E committees, would they be able to give us an update on are there any funding available to upgrade the HVACs in our schools? I'm not sure if that's something that I should approach their committee to have that answered, or is it something that we can get a response here?
I think in the Q&A to staff, that would be an appropriate place to ask those two latter questions.
Okay.
And I won't go into discussion now because it wouldn't be permitted. But I think Kelly can speak as to those two items during the next board meeting. And then as for subcommittee reports, just as we've been doing with liaison committees. So for example, the SDI and excuse me, just like we did for SDI and Mandarin Immersion Task Force, we often get reports back. And just like we did as well for the demographic subcommittee, to the extent that there's reports back or productions of work, that would generally be in order. Henry, so I think that addresses all of your points.
Okay. So can we still have a time allowed for discussion on and get updates on the ventilation HVAC issue? Can that still be okay?
So
as a future topic.
Got it, understood. So the report is generally happens by default. So can I get a feel for whether or not we want to continue to address ventilation in a future meeting topic? And I believe the threshold I've used before is 4 committee members to put a topic on the agenda in the future. So anyone in favor of addressing ventilation at a follow-up meeting? Great, thank you. And just to give a direction to the, thank you, you can lower your hands. Just to give direction on what we expect to see at the next board meeting, to the extent that the demographic subcommittee would like to do follow-up direction or just showcase its work on the points that we've directed that would potentially make it onto the meeting. We know that the demographers will be showing up, or at least that's what we've scheduled them to do, and other potential future meeting topics. So that's right now what the agenda is looking like. Things can obviously get pushed. Brian.
I know the long range facilities plan update. There'll be more topics around that coming. I'm assuming, I don't know if next meeting or the following meeting, but that's a big project that we'll need to allocate time for, I would think.
Good point. So either a status update or potential discussion. Thank you, Brian. Henry.
Sorry, one more. I mean, I'm not sure if it could be something that we could just do with the ventilation subcommittee, but looking at school reopening, just be able to see what we can do to make sure, like, get updates and get how can we open the school the safest way possible for our students. I'm not sure it's something that the subcommittee can look at also, but want to see if that could be a future topic.
It would not fit within the scope of the ventilation subcommittee unless it was about safe reopening when it comes to ventilation and HVAC in general. So it would have to be done either by the committee or at the committee's direction to another sub-body. But before that, Trustee Jones, is that a question or before I take a temperature?
When we're talking about anything related to reopening, I don't know if anybody saw, but the bill, there was a deal struck by the legislature and the governor that was announced on Monday. And that has thrown things into high gear. So anything reopening related that's handled in this committee may be kind of too late. So if people have concerns about reopening, I think that needs to be brought to the attention immediately of district staff, because
Trustee Jones, don't make me step in to address no discussion.
Does that, I mean, but does that make sense if you're talking about adding something to this committee's work regarding reopening? I'm not sure that that will be effective.
And one suggestion I would have, sorry, Trustee Jones, one suggestion I would have is to sometimes ask a question that potentially makes a rhetorical point instead of engaging in discussion. I will still encourage you not to do that, but that is a way that people often approach that. But taking Trustee Jones' point, I'm still going to go ahead and take temperature on reopening, putting that point aside. So those interested in addressing school reopening and obviously it would have to fit within the scope of facilities, right? That is the scope of our committee. So addressing school reopening. Great. So we have so I will work with, again, sorry about that, Trustee Jones. I will work with Kelly on other items that, you know, as you all know, I work with the district liaison to create the agenda. I'll also consider these items and, you know, move them as needed. It is now 9:37. So thank you so much, everybody, for sticking it out to this time, and have a great rest of your evening.
Night.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.